Tim, can I ask you a question?
Please do.
Yes, please, because I want to hear more what you've got to say. Your transition into being a professional illustrator uh, took great advantage of the fact that so many people were starting their own small press publishing companies, like Grant, not you, Grant, but the other,
Yeah.
and others. And you did a lot of really amazing work in those.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
golden age of small press, I think.
yes,
Original
absolutely,
age.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering about though is that did you find yourself as you became more involved in your real professional career with the Imagineers and such, the turning down more of that work, or did as well as fanzine work? I know that you had to withdraw from that at some point,
Yeah,
but how did
I
you
ran out
balance
of
it all?
time. Yeah, it was just a time thing, pretty much. I used to go home when I worked at Hallmark Cards in the 70s. I would draw funny animals all day and then go home and do things for George Sithers or for Grant or whoever at night. And Owlswick Press was another one.
Mm-hmm.
And once I get to Disney, the mouse sucks a lot out of you. And when you do that all day long, you don't really want to sit down at a drawing board so much at night. I occasionally would do things. In the early 70s, I started working with Harlan Ellison on illustrations for The Last Dangerous Visions,
Ah,
Oh boy.
mythical, that unicorn.
it's
Yeah,
It's
I'm
actually going to
still
appear.
waiting. I'm
It's
still
Are,
coming.
waiting.
aren't you, aren't your illustrations going to be published in the new big package?
Yes, it's not, I think I did something like 120 illustrations for that. And a lot of those stories over the years have been withdrawn or the authors have died.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ellison estate is going to be publishing all three, Dangerous Visions, again Dangerous Visions, The Last Dangerous Visions, in sequence over the next, I think, 2 years.
Yes.
So whatever's left of the stories that I illustrated they'll be there.
In the
Yeah,
individual books. Boy,
yeah.
I'd like to see them publish a single volume of all of the art because I'm sure there's so many stories have been withdrawn that there's probably lots and lots. For instance, when I was in college, I went to college with Lisa Tuttle. She was one of my college friends, and she sold her story to Dangerous Visions while we were still in college, my freshman or sophomore year. And I remember her getting in the mail from Harlan a Xerox of the illustration you had done for her story.
Oh, that's
And
great.
that was 52 years ago.
They
That's
still
the only
exist.
one I've ever seen.
A guy named Michael Straczynski, who is Harlan's executor, has been going through that house, and the stuff is still there, but it's like Citizen Kane or something. You know, it's so much of everything. But
It
that's
has to be. You are you participating in the refurbishment of his house?
just as an advisor. I've gone over a couple of times. I don't know how many of our viewers today know about Harlan's house. In the 80s, my brother, Steve Kirk, who is a very fine sculptor, redid the entire facade of has house, facing out on the street side. And Harlan called it the style Aztec Martian, I think, or something like that. And it was all bas-relief fiberglass, a beautiful thing. But a lot of that over the years, the climate takes its toll. So they're going through refurbishment of that as well as the inside of the house too. And the goal is to, yeah, the goal is to make it
I'm sorry.
An author, like a place of pilgrimage or a place for conferences, things like that.
Tim, did Steve do waste tools, or are there tools for the ornamentation?
He sculpted them in, I think, clay or whatever the gray clay is that you don't fire.
Yeah.
And then they made molds out of those and then cast in fiberglass.
So do they still have the molds?
Somewhere, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they could take a mold off the existing, even if the exterior is in poor condition, you could pull a tool off of a mold imprint that you could take off of the building and then work from that way. But it's not the right way to work. It's working backward, but it's possible.
It's mainly the support structure that is kind of deteriorated,
Yeah.
but it's still salvageable. So we'll see.
Is this the house that was off of Mulholland, or is this the
Yeah,
house
it's
after? That is?
3484 Coy Drive.
Oh, yeah. It's 3430. Yeah, I remember him coming out to meet me at the curb one time in a bathrobe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 30. All right.
And that's somebody else. One of your questions on the list that Edie sent out was characters that you've met through fandom or fan art, and Harlan was certainly one that was very high on that list.
Mm-hmm.
I'd
Yeah, I
have
remember.
I'd have to mention Rotsler,
Yeah,
who was just an amazing guy, and I miss him to this day. He was very encouraging and just a hell of a lot of fun to hang out. This isn't the appropriate place for it, but Grant and I had the most unique experience of our lives in 1995.
Tell the story, Dan. Tell the story.
we talk about it.
It's great.
Mhm.
Well, we were at a convention in Las Vegas. And at one point, Grant and I had arranged to sneak away and go to one of the strip bars. We were kind of like giggling kids. And we were on our way out of the hotel, and suddenly this voice behind us goes, "Hey, where are you going?" And it was Rotsler. And we kind of said, we're going to go see some naked girls. We're going to see some. Okay, I'll come along. And of course, as I'm sure you all know, he had a long career in the adult industry and stuff like that. And so what we got to do was we got to watch about 2 hours of Bill Rotsler prying the strippers off him. They were all over him, and it was an amazing thing to watch. He was so skilled. Once they found out he was there and who he was sticking cartoons in the girls' garters. And at first they got pissed off, and then they laughed, and then they surrounded him, and he shake their tits in his face. Get those things out of it. Go talk to those guys down there. They care about what you're doing. Was that kind of the gist of it, Mr. Canfield?
Well, you and I were just laughing our asses off too, watching this whole spectacle. It was he'd draw a cartoon, he'd give it to a girl, and then she'd be over on his lap practically, asking him how to get into the adult entertainment industry. And he was, it's like you said, he was just, get away from me. I don't have time for this, And it was just so funny. It was, and I think that was the last time, I saw him.
Yeah, me too. That was about 2 years before he died.
Yeah, that was
And,
in 95, that was in 95, and he died in
95.
97. Right.
Right. And I think that he went long, particularly when he found out where we were going, just because he wanted to watch our reaction, because I think he was showing off a little bit as well. But it was like one of those special moments that you never could anticipate ever having.
It was an hour of pure joy for me, just watching this whole thing go on. It was terrific. Thanks for telling the story, though.
Okay, well, sure. Well,
you've told the story well many times, I know, and you actually told it in print once or twice.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I wrote a report on that convention and then published it 20 years later.
Yeah, that was it.
With your drawings.
Along with my caricatures
That's
from
right.
people at that convention.
People don't know
Some of
that
those
Grant is a tremendous. Oh, I'm sorry. Grant is a tremendous caricaturist.
Thank you, Dan. But I was going to say, I sent to Edie a kind of a one-page compilation of some of those illustrations from that convention. I don't know if you have that available, Edie. Can you put that up?
So it's a perfect lead, and let's take a little art break. After talking about art for so long, I think everyone would like to see some. I'm not sure which piece you're talking about, so
It's
I'll
the
just
one that's a
ripple through
page
them
just
and,
called caricatures.
okay, I'm gonna share my screen and we'll look at a little art. And I've got something to show for everybody, so bear with me for a minute.
Well, that's the one I want to start with anyway.
Well, you're gonna get what comes up. Okay, can you see
Oh,
thumbnails?
wow. Yeah, it's in the second row, the one called Grant Canfield Fan Caricatures.
Right in the middle, right here.
It's not
I
in the
can see it.
second row for all of us.
Right in the middle, just before the Fandom Harvest one. There you go,
Gotcha.
that one.
Can you see the screen show?
Not yet.
Not
No.
yet.
Okay, so
It's,
Uh,
it's
one
still
second.
thumbnail.
yeah, I know, I got the wrong side.
Can
How
everybody
about
see
now?
the thumbnails?
Aha!
Okay, here
There
it is. Now, all of these except the one of Steve Stiles were drawn at that convention in 1995 in Las Vegas. And out of all the people that are shown on this page, only Dan and Lynn are still alive.
Arnie's still with us.
Oh, is he?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
I'd heard that he'd passed, but I know Joyce had passed, but I guess Arnie's still with us, but all the rest of them are gone. We haven't talked about Steve Stiles at all. I drew that one in 2018, I
Yeah.
think, when I was out there for the core flu at Rockville.
I'm still not over that. Steve was one of my dearest friends and probably my closest cartoonist friend.
Yeah,
He was an amazing guy, funny. I just I still have a very hard time with it. In all honesty, Steve died at the end of 2019,
right.
and another dear friend of Grant and mine, Frank Lunny,
Right.
died at the towards the end of January 2020, a month later.
Right.
And these two were amongst my best friends in the world. And just the whole concept of fandom has been greatly diminished for me since they've been gone. I mean,
In later years, Robert Lichtman and I became very good friends after he
For
had
sure.
married Carol Carr.
For sure. Robert and I did a lot of projects together. And
Right.
but Steve was amazing, and he was a fan artist from 1958 until the day he fucking died, and he loved it.
He was great too. Oh,
goodness.
this is one of our collaborations, Dan. Remember
Yes,
this?
yes. It's called Fuck a Duck.
Yeah, that was. We're so classy.
Yeah, yeah. You can
Yeah.
see why we've been friends for so long.
Oh, and this one, the next one here. This was name tags I did for you and Lynn.
Yep, yep. I think I made that.
This was a
Made that
collaboration we
stand.
did for a Disclave cover.
That's right.
And then I did a bunch of these cartoons where everything was less than 12. I don't know why I did that, but
It made sense to you at
I
the time.
illustrated that book for Terry.
Brilliant caricature, by the way.
That's one of the yellows from that book, actually. Oh, that was I did that one for that statue. That was for Terry Hughes
For Moda.
for a back cover of Moda. Yeah, one of my favorites. This was a collaboration with Rotsler. He would send out those drawings like that and try and get people to respond to him. He'd do a setup and you're supposed to do the reply. And he did a lot of those kind of cartoons. Can you go back one, Edie? I wanted to comment on the one with the all the houses and everything. When I was doing that, I couldn't get Tim Kirk out of my mind because he did so many what I thought of as fantastic or fantastical architectural scenes, little hobbit houses going up a hill and stuff like that, fantasy castles and things like that I wanted to try one. So this was Tim, you can think of this as an homage to you.
It's beautiful. It looks like San Francisco. Looks like Telegraph Hill.
Well, you know what I did was I would walk around San Francisco and I'd draw roof shapes. And then I'd come back and I'd try and incorporate as many of the roof shapes as I could into this one drawing.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
What was your process? You had white paper. Did you have a blue underdrawing? Did you underdraw and then ink over it, or what was your process to create that drawing?
Well, for most of my work, it was either blue pencil or regular graphite pencil, and then ink over it. So that was the same. I did a lot of all of us, I think, probably did a lot of headings for Locus. Particularly, this was back when they were in the mimeograph days. But Charlie Brown was publishing this when he lived in San Francisco, and not only would I do headers like this for him, but I'd go out and help with the collating of the issues. You know, it was like collating parties that he put on. This was one of my favorite covers I did for this was for Terry Hughes's Moda.
It's nice.
This was the very first fan art that I ever had published, was for Science Fiction Review, June 1970. And Dick Geist was the first one to accept my work and the first one to publish it.
I see some Zipatone there.
You bet. Zipatone and I think that was when I was still in the rapidograph days too. I think that was two different sizes of rapidograph.
Edie, why don't you go on to some of the other art? Yeah.
But here we go with Tim. Yeah.
Oh, let me just add to your comment to Tim. I've always been a big fan of Tim's work, and of course, everybody thinks of all the little creatures and everything that he did. But I have to agree with Grant. The architecture in some of your illustrations and stuff are just really outstanding, and it makes me forget about all the cute little guys. It's no wonder to me that you became an Imagineer and designed the kind of things that you have designed, because you've got a basic feel for the architecture that I really appreciate. And you make the fantasy stuff like an old house from Providence look like it could exist and be scary as hell too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're buildable, but I appreciate that.
They weren't meant to be.
Yeah, Locus was a great source for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even did a couple of those Locus headings at the very beginning of my fan art stuff.
And Locus was published monthly, wasn't
There's
it?
one.
There you go.
one.
Exactly.
This is for
Brilliant.
Emerald, which was a sword and sorcery fanzine. I think George Sithers was the editor. A lot of Conan the Barbarian stuff.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
This
And
is,
Oh, yeah.
too.
Yeah, exactly.
this is Lovecraft. And I think this was an award, like a thanks for participating award or something like that.
That's great.
I love that.
I've got one of your dragon illustrations hanging on my wall, Tim.
Oh, thank you. Just a little computer fairy.
Nobody
Very
could
nice.
do a dragon like you, Tim. You were the dragon.
Oh, there's your
There's
Harlan.
There's Harlan, yeah.
Well,
And
you did Harlan Elephant. I remember you did some things with that.
That was what I thought was a very clever satirical contribution to Raphael, which really wasn't all that clever.
Yeah.
With all the
Yeah.
pipes, though. The pipes is funny.
I do see some whiteout also.
Yeah, and some blue pencil. He was very gracious about it, though, and he either loved you or he hated you.
Or
Yeah.
both. Or both. I had some of both. He
Yeah.
once called me up on the phone and asked me why I when I drew him, he looked like a troll.
Yeah.
I had no
yeah.
good answer other than the fact that trolls are funnier than
Yeah.
so. He was a character for sure.
I did
Oh,
this for a change of address card when I was moving from one place to another.
Oh, cool.
Tim, it's art like that inspired me to. You do a cartoon of a guy with a wheelbarrow full of junk, and I can do a guy with a wheelbarrow full of junk. It's not the same guy. It's not the same wheelbarrow. It's not the same junk. But
It's like it's like in a drawing like this, it's not just funny as a whole, but the individual lines are funny. The individual little pieces in it are funny.
That's
It's
from
just
caffeine.
it's just a very cleverly drawn cartoon.
Thank you.
I'm a big admirer, Tim. Sorry.
I always try to find the humanity in whether it's a monster or whatever.
Uh-huh.
oh, that's
We're-
nice.
we're
I haven't
here at
seen that
Robot.
before.
This
I
was
haven't seen that before.
this was a convention progress report, I think, for RadCon, which I think was up in Washington State. This I just did for somebody's sketchbook.
Oh, wow.
This for what, file 770, I think.
What's the shading in this one? Is that
That's low point pen.
Oh. Shades
I-
of George Barr?
As long as I'm complimenting you, Tim. I also have a lot of your children's books, and they're
Oh, thank you.
wonderful. There's the big one, the Goblins and Ghosts, I think it's
Some
called.
goblins, yeah.
That's
Mhm.
that's a really wonderful book.
And I did a lot of stuff for Henson too, for
Hmm.
baby Muppets
Mhm.
at Christmas time, things like that.
Hmm.
But thank you very much. I was lucky. I was very lucky.
We don't have stuff from Dan or Jim?
Well, I sent my stuff in pretty late, so I don't know if Edie ever got a chance to
Download it.
to deal with it. So,
We have some more yet.
all right, good.
Okay.
Since we don't seem to have much to say.
Oh, you guys have lots to say.
Oh, we've been talking
Oh.
like a mile a minute.
I remember it well.
Yeah, so Tim did two of these on my name, but this is the one I sent in. Yeah, so obviously this is one of my fanzines, Esoteric. This is had a short run, then I did a longer run of Creative City. But again, I'll draw your attention to, Tim going to the obvious of, how can he make a play on my name? And he did it brilliantly. And the other little fanzines that are being held by the creator, Small Talkie on Torch, or other fanzines also published by MKA, and then of course, Tim's alma mater, Cal State Long Beach.
Oh, yes.
You got to plug in for that.
What year was that, Jim?
Oh, good grief, Tim. I want to say 69, maybe 68.
That shaky line.
Well, I know it's yeah. I mean, strangely enough, I think your line got less shaky in years, and usually with my line, it's gotten more shaky over the years. So it's two trains that are passing. Oh crap!
That too.
Yeah, my artwork was
Oh,
all
Mike.
over the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my artwork was all over the map. As much as anything, I really appreciate the ability to fail spectacularly using sending things out to fanzines, because this was a period where I was doing this, and as soon as I got out, I realized, I listened to George Barr. He looked at that and said, well, people can either fill a space or use the space, and I picked in that earlier drawing that we've just left to fill the space. And I learned from his criticism to cut back to the minimum, which is kind of the story of my life ever since then. This one was kind of starting to look more at ideas. If you had a robot squirrel, squirrels in my backyard pooped. So I guess a robot squirrel would do the same, but probably poop nuts. And again, I kind of found myself doing a lot of these kinds of illos, and focusing more on technique than idea. Again, sending something out, realizing, this is something I need to really focus on. This was done a long time ago. I want to say early 70s. Barry Gilliam was very kind, very flattering to actually publish a fanzine article about my fanzine art. And again, just an example of, me discovering stippling.
Beautifully decorative stuff, Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this was an example of a good one where I did a pencil work. Ken Fletcher came back and did the inking over it.
Very cool.
Yeah, and this is an earlier 170. Again, how many lines can I jam on the sheet of paper? But again, when I did it, I realized, well, I couldn't fit all of the words in the word balloon. Got to fix that. And again, just thinking in terms of, the idea needs to take precedent over the, I don't know, rendering. So from that point onward, I really focus more on, focus on the story, not on the lines.
Like somebody said, fanzines were a great, safe place to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Find out what
They
worked.
were. They
Well,
were.
one thing addressing what Jim just said about all the extra line work and everything, I think it was R. Crum who once said one of the most fun things in art is cross-hatching. That when you get to the part of the drawing where you're going to start doing the shading and doing it in pen, that's just fun. I don't care who you are, that's fun, Dan. Right?
Yeah, I agree, but cross-hatching is also the thing that can ruin a piece of art.
It can. You have to be very careful with it, but who's
Mhm.
That's
yours?
This is my first published cover. December 1971, I think. This was Jerry Lapidus, another fellow we just recently lost. He was the head of the science fiction club at Syracuse University. And I met him when I was still in high school. And he kind of invited me into the gang who was putting out this fanzine. And I had done some interior art, but this was the first cover that I got to do. And it's strangely, unbelievably, I still sort of like it. But oh God, that's
early.
another one. Somebody else put that one up. I didn't send the JPEG for that one.
Nothing dies on the internet.
No.
This is sorry, my name's so big up there. This was like the first page of a portfolio. I did this drawing to commemorate an anniversary of my mentor Vaughn Bodie's death. Vaughn loved airplanes and loved complicated technology. I mean, even though he was drawing sometimes the simplest cartoons with his lizards and stuff, those lizards would climb into a jet airplane and it would be real. And I decided to try and do something I thought he might appreciate because it had that technology overload.
Cool drawing.
That's beautiful.
This is one of my satirical drawings to poking fun at Frank R. Paul and some of the early pulp covers.
Is this a Rich Code?
Yes, this was a fanzine published by Rich Code, and I got the idea of light bulbs instead of stars. But not an original idea, I'm sure, but I had a lot of fun with it. This is a cover for Rob Jackson's Inca. And this was steampunk cyberpunk story that I did the cover for, and incorporating the various elements of steam-powered robot and guy. He's actually wearing spring-heeled boots and that sort of stuff. It was a lot of Victorian doodling.
Well, I thought you really you got brilliant with your ability to do different kinds of lettering.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all just on this one piece, all the different hand lettered pieces of really calligraphic art.
Oh, well, thanks. I always thought that that was just another skill that I would need to have to be the kind of cartoonist that I thought I would grow up to be. And I never quite realized that, but I learned to do lettering, and I did a lot of it when I worked professionally when I was at Heavy Metal and places like that. And it's funny, earlier we mentioned Steve Stiles, and I did a later cover for Inca in 2019, I think, and it came out shortly before Steve died. But when the next issue came out, Steve had already written a letter of comment, and the letter of comment was all about how wonderful my lettering was, and it
I have to
brought
agree.
tears to my eyes. Brought tears to my eyes.
Another
This
case
one,
of
this one was a trapdoor cover. You can't see underneath where the little row of thumbnails are is the punchline to this drawing, which is Scythe Matters.
you wag.
Okay.
And, actually, once upon a time, I thought, wow, I may have even written to Tim saying, Tim, I've got this idea for a cartoon that I think would be a great Tim Kirk cartoon. So, but I did it myself.
I really liked working for Robert Lichtman, doing stuff for Trapdoor in the later years.
Oh, for sure. Me too. I did some of my best work for him.
Yeah.
This is just a little color piece to prove that I could.
That's
or
nice.
can do color. It was just a little puppy doing a little spelunking with his balls hanging out.
Uh-huh.
Is this watercolor or marker?
That's watercolor.
Great. Lovely.
Is that a
Oh,
real
Jesus.
vaccine?
How did you find that?
Wow.
Jeff Shallis sent
Holy,
it to
this-
me.
Wow, this is as close, Tim, as I ever got to doing Lord of the Rings. This was a cover I did for a free weekly newspaper in Washington, D.C. that was where they reviewed the Ralph Bakshi
Oh, yes.
Lord of the
Wow.
Rings,
Very
and
cool.
and also possibly Watership Down. I combined
Oh, yeah,
the two.
Uh-huh.
But wow, I even haven't seen that in a long in ages. That's markers. That one is markers.
Those sad rabbits.
Well, that was.
That's what we have
Okay.
for the art.
Thank you.
material.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for showing
those.
that stuff, Edie.
Sure. So, so we have two directions we can go in. We can talk about more of the technical parts of being an artist, desktop publishing and how that affected the art. Or we could take a minute and talk about other people that you met in fandom along the way. Everyone spoke of the how wonderful it was to send in your art and get comments and so on. Let's talk a little bit about the people that you met, in addition to the Trimbles and the mentors that you had. Who are the memorable fans that you met early in your fanish career or later in your fanish career? Tim, why don't you start?
I can mention right off the bat, Appa has a long tradition of colorful characters. Bruce Pells, Fred Patton. I should have made a written list, but a lot of very, very unique individuals. And they were very welcoming to me. As soon as I walked in the door, I just felt like I was at home, I can't think of any other names offhand, but I'm sure people here could name a couple more. But Fred Patton especially, I remember him saying he was a great collector. He would buy two copies of an action figure, one to play with and one to keep in the bubble pack, untouched. And that always impressed me as a collector. And I finally had to stop collecting because it got expensive.
Well, it's not just the collecting expense, but it's where do you put it?
That's true.
One of the things I've done the last 2 years has been just going through my collection, and it gets a little bit embarrassing when you fill up two closets and the garage. you know,
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
you know,
I'm trying to get ready to move, so I've been sorting and boxing things, and it's just never ending. I can't believe the crap I have held on to.
Where are you going to move, Dan? Where are you going to move?
Well, it's been postponed for the time being. Still going to be here in Portland.
Oh, okay.
My landlord decided he's getting tired of being a landlord, and so probably sometime in the spring. That's not neither here nor there.
Well,
But,
for
just-
me to answer Edie's question, when I got into fandom, Dan Steffan and his wife Lynn were two of my first and best friends, and I've considered Dan one of my best friends for the last 53 years. So,
Yes.
and as a result of when I'd go to conventions, I'd hang out with them, which meant then that I was also hanging out with Frank Lunny and Ted White and Steve Stiles and the rest of Rich Brown and the rest of that crew. And those were kind of the people that I met that kind of became lifelong friends for me.
Indeed. I mean, sadly, so many people have died in the last couple of years.
Well, Catherine,
fit into
Frank,
that.
Steve.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even want to think about the list, but
I know.
yeah, Tim, I'm curious about any friendships you made with the people whose books you illustrated. Did they ever reach out to you and express their joy at having Tim Kirk?
Most of them have passed on. I think, Lord Dunsany and people like that. I once, on a student trip to England in 1967, I had the option of either going to Stonehenge or Oxford. So naturally, I chose Oxford. And somehow I managed to go to Blackwell's bookstore. They gave me Tolkien's street address. I took a bus out to his house. I found his house. I think I stole like a leaf off of one of his rose bushes. And later on, I found out that he had moved away long before I was there because of people like me. So I had
you were thrilled, right?
Oh, yes. Speaking of people who have passed on, I had a very dear friend, a very fine, funny fan artist named Mike Gilbert.
He was great.
He was great. And we used to do cartoon jams with each other. We would go to a convention and sit in the hallways and just make fun of people with cartoons. And then later on, we published that as part of we would go back and forth between us in a dialogue, a cartoon dialogue. And that's been done on stage, I think, other places too.
Oh, yeah. Not only on stage. Do you remember Tropical Torcon Tales, Dan?
Topical Torcon.
Was it topical, not tropical?
I think
topical
so.
Torcon Tales.
I think so. Yeah, that's one of the things that bonded me to Grant and also to Bill Rotsler. It was starting at Torcon in 72, 73, I guess it was.
72, I think.
And I still have the drawing. I recently looked at it. Grant and I were at breakfast together, and Rotsler was on the other side of the restaurant. So we took a placemat, and we each drew a character wearing a holster and drawing a gun and saying "draw," and we sent it over to his table, and he sent it back with a punchline that humiliated both of us, of course. But we spent a lot of that convention and many conventions afterwards. We'd get together in a group, Jay Kinney, Ken Fletcher, lots of others, and we would just entertain each other with our cartoons, and it was magical. It was magical.
Harry Bell and Jim Barker.
By the time it became a panel at conventions, it kind of lost its magic. But boy, was it fun!
It was, it was most fun when we'd be in the bar, kind of sitting around a round table, and there's it is tropical, not topical.
See, that's something by Rotsler, but that's not the book that we published that weekend.
No, what was the book? We called it
something Fan Art Tales.
Yeah, it was a different one that we did.
Esoteric Fan Art Tales.
Esoteric Fan Art Tales. That was it. But it was the fun was sitting around a table and having a whole bunch of fan artists kind of in a circle around this table, and just passing drawings back and forth, and somebody do a setup, somebody else would do the punchline, or vice versa. But then, as Dan said, in later years, it became a thing where they said, well, this is so much fun, let's make it an event. And they set us up in a line, all so you only had an opportunity really to relate to the person next to you. And there was really a lot less energy, and it was much less funny than it was in those earlier days.
If I can just add a quick anecdote, when my wife got to know the fans who were my friends and started going with me to conventions and all of that kind of stuff, she was always amazed by when I would get together with a group of cartoonists and we'd have a jam session, and we'd be in a hotel room or in a bar or something, 5, 6 people all drawing together, nobody talking to each other, nobody except occasionally laughing at the cartoons.
Yeah.
And it was the same way with some of my my fan friends. Until she met me, she said she'd never been in a room full of people who would come to visit from out of town and sit around and read. Sit around in the living room and all read while instead of talking to each other. So fans are weird. What can I do?
Yeah.
God bless him.
Yeah.
Indeed.
But,
Yeah.
the point is, I think that, the role of a convention, I appreciate, because again, even though I live in Southern California and Los Angeles in my entire life, I've always been in Northern LA County, which doesn't sound like it should be as isolated as I was, but I remember being very, very isolated. And so in 72, going to a WesterCon down in near LAX, or the WorldCon, or going to the Bay Area, that was an eye-opener to me, because it's one thing to, again, write someone, put a stamp on the envelope and put it in the mailbox and hope that someone writes back to you. But it's another thing to actually step onto the floor of a convention hall in a hotel and see 300 or 400 other people or more who,
Indeed.
I don't have to explain myself to. I don't have to say, I've got this book and it's important because we cut to the chase, and they immediately go, oh yeah, I read that book. And if you like that book, you'll probably like these 2 books as well. Or there was a person who Tim may remember, who was a Losvis member back, and he lived he lived in downtown LA, and he was building a computer. Now, by saying building a computer, it was a computer that took up a room that was probably 20 by 15. And literally he was building a home computer, but it took up the size of a master bedroom. And it's not so much that I was going to do that, but the fact that someone could point and say it can be done was an eye opener, in the same way that when I said at the teletype, I didn't really care about the weather report in Rome, but the fact that I could get it was an eye opener. In the same way as going to the conventions, is I learned more than I gave. I typically was not the person, because I was a little younger, I wouldn't be the ones who would be sitting there. I remember one time, I think I fell asleep against George Barr, because we were in a convention and I'd been up all night, and all of a sudden I just couldn't keep my eyes open. I keeled over and leaned against George, because I knew that, in about 12 hours the convention was going to close, and I'd get back on the bus or the car or the train to go home, and that opportunity was be lost. So in other words, conventions for me were an education as much as they were entertainment.
I had the opportunity to get to know some people who later went on to become famous. I mean, William Gibson, who is probably one of the most famous science fiction futurist, excuse me. He was a cartoonist when I first met him, and he was sending cartoons to fanish fanzines, and watched it all develop from there, and other people who developed their writing careers as I knew them, and I always was greatly impressed by that, and always amazed by the way fandom helped people along. It's a long tradition of fan writers becoming pro writers, and to a lesser extent, but still true, fan artists becoming professional artists, like Tim and George being perhaps the two greatest examples of that. And it's you never know when the guy next to you is going to turn out to be famous. You just, I guess it makes sense not to make enemies.
Be nice to everybody.
That's right. That's right. May I interject something here? Well, we haven't really talked about it, but I just had a flash on the idea of the first time I went into a art show at a Worldcon. Again, we mentioned Bijo earlier and stuff like that, but I've never been to something on the scale of what the Worldcon art shows got to be, you know, just hundreds of paintings and drawings and stuff, and a lot of them really great, a lot of them by professionals, a lot of them by fans, but just the whole communal quality of it was just really impressive. And even though I never did well in the art show, people didn't buy my art. I had the opportunity to be a judge a couple of times, at least once with Grant, and we were a judge at an art show with what was his name, the famous Italian illustrator. Do you remember, Grant? Do you remember that one?
I remember being a judge with you, but I don't remember that guy.
Oh, well, anyways. But the art shows were as eye-opening as almost anything about discovering painting.
Yeah.
But that's all. I wanted to call attention to that because I thought it was really important, because that's part of the zeitgeist as well.
So we've been going almost 2 hours, and I'm getting tired. You guys must be getting tired too. So do you have any comments that you would like to make before we open it up for questions? And folks,
I have just one comment.
Just one more thing, Grant. Start getting your questions in the chat, please, if you want to ask a question or make a comment. Grant, go ahead.
Okay, just one thing I want to add is I want to thank my friend Tom Becker, who's here and who helped set me up with Zoom. So this is my first Zoom experience, and this is thanks to Tom's help.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, so do we have questions from the group?
Oh, nobody
Wow,
cares.
I've never seen this group quiet.
All right.
You know, it's just like in fanzines. People have been saying for years that they never wrote letters of comment about the cartoonists and the artists because, well, we don't know what to say about art. Tell us what you feel, what you like and what you don't like. That's all. That's all we have ever asked for.
Does anyone recall the Bill Rotsler cartoon where he had one of his figures and the caption was, "Art is what I point at when I say art"?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Wish I had that
Classic.
copy of that. That's been something that's guided me for years.
Okay.
My friend Mike Gilbert used to say, art is whatever you can get away with.
True words.
All right. So Geri, would you please unmute? You have some comments to make.
Yeah, early on, and I think it was Grant who talked about being really, all of you talked about being really into comics, but that you didn't get into comics fandom. You ended up in science fiction fandom. And I find that really, really important and kind of it's certainly to science fiction fandom's benefit. But I'm wondering why? Why not, given all your art skills and everything and your comics interest, why didn't you end up in comics fandom? Why did we get so lucky?
I think I may have,
me.
I've got an answer for you, or at least
Okay.
it's my answer, is that, yes, I'm a comic book collector. I have a lot of comics, and there were comic book fanzines that I contributed to, but I didn't do a lot of it for the reason that when I cracked open one, it was basically people drawing, artwork of Batman or Superman or whatever. And that just didn't speak to me. It didn't intrigue me. Whereas in science fiction and fantasy, especially science fiction, it just seemed like a much more wide open field. I could go and I could make comments and I didn't have to draw Batman.
Okay.
It's just not that interesting. It was not interesting to me. Whereas, I could do what I wanted to do and follow my own path, which I could only do in science fiction.
It's kind of like the difference between fanfic zines and fanzines. There's a huge whole fanfic, but that's writing about characters that somebody else has created. And you guys all got to create a lot more of your own.
Well, and the truth is, honestly, I did do a comic book. I worked when I worked at Mattel. I worked and I did a Masters of the Universe comic book, and the check cleared, but I'm not going to tell you it's my best work because it's just like, okay, you pay me to do something that I wouldn't otherwise do. And I think Mr. Kirk, you did a Batman drawing at WDI for a proposed ride.
Yeah, I mean, when you had to do it, I was a really good tracer. I'm really good with model sheets. So
yeah.
but Carl Barks could always do Scrooge McDuck better than I could. So why tamper with perfection? I never bought superhero comics either. Somehow I wound up with Spider-Man #1 or Amazing Fantasy, which is where Spider-Man first appeared.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I was always a funny animal guy. So I don't know. But I never wanted to pursue that as a fan.
I think part of it is that comics fandom had a very heavy overlap of professionals. And if you were to contribute to like Bill Spicer's fanzine or a lot of the fanzines that are printing comic strips the way Bodie did and a lot of other people were doing in the late 60s and so you had to be a professional quality, or hopefully. And certainly I never felt I was that in my early years. So I would have never even considered contributing to those fanzines. Science fiction fanzines, you could just send unconnected drawings, Phillos, and it would you could get accepted, and then maybe somebody would ask you to do a cover and stuff like that. And then later, as I was there for more time, the community in our fandom is what kept me there.
One artist I would recommend who came out of the comics fanzines was Don Newton, because Don Newton did a lot of work in comic fanzines, and then he went to work for Charlton Comics on a long run of Phantom. And talking to him, he said, we talked a little bit about his page rate at Charlton, which was, tip money in a Denny's. But he said he really liked doing the Phantom. And then when his editor went over to DC, he got a decent page rate. And there are a couple of other artists like Bill Black, who came out of the comic fanzines, who ended up in comics. But again, that wasn't my thing.
Thanks.
Hi, Ted.
There's Ted.
Can I say something?
Please.
I would just like to remark on the fact that there was a time when hand stenciling artwork for Mimeo was an art form in and of itself, something that artists who got themselves badly traced by fan editors who did not know how to do it probably resented. But those of us like Terry Carr and myself, who were really seriously into the transcription of art into Mimeo, we understood that we were, in a sense, collaborating with the artist in the translation from a pen and ink drawing or whatever it was into Mimeo. Terry Carr taught me how to do Ray Nelson. Now, Ray Nelson just drew simple line cartoons, nothing fancy, no cross-hatching, none of that. But Terry, when he would stencil that, he would take a shading plate and he would draw a sort of a phantom line of shading immediately adjacent to the actual line that Ray had drawn. And it would soften and broaden the line in a way that really worked well with Ray Nelson's artwork. And I picked that up from Terry. I taught Terry other things. We were into taking it and making it look as good as it could look in Mimeo. And I know I taught Dan how to do a lot of that because, as Geri pointed out, I had and still have All those shading plates and lettering guides and mimeoscope down in my basement, haven't touched them in 20 or 30 years, but they're still there. They could still be used, I suppose. But it seems to me it's become a lost art.
Well, nobody's got mimeos anymore.
There's that.
Yeah. But indeed, you taught me how to do it. And
You got good at it.
well, like you, I had to be good enough to make the whatever I was stenciling come across. And
You had to understand the medium. You had to understand that it weren't, I mean, electrostenciling was soulless. It was more faithful to the artist's work, particularly if the artist worked in thick and thin lines and stuff like that, brush strokes, things like that. You couldn't really duplicate that on Mimeo. But something was lost at the same time, because as soon as you went to electrostenciling, there was no more interpretation. It was just whatever the quality of the electrostencil was.
sure, but for most artists, that was enough just to get their art printed relatively close to how they drew it. And the people who could hand stencil, like you and Terry and a very few others who could do it justice, there just weren't enough of you.
True.
The other note I'd make about it would, fanzines were always handcrafted, handmade publications. And so many hands, had to go into the publication, the creation of the magazine. And so when I received a fanzine from someone, I felt that this was a handmade, hand-tooled, product, something that they cared about, and to take the time to do it. I mean, honestly, Ted, if you were to take one of your typical magazines, your fanzines, and calculate how many hours it took you to create one issue, I think you might be embarrassed by the, hourly rate you would have been paying yourself to make that.
Well, when I was in high school, I was putting out a very ambitious mimeoed fanzine called Stellar. And I used to spend my evenings down in my basement at my mimeoscope with listening to music on the radio or a tape player or something. And I would spend hours stenciling artwork. There was an awful lot of pleasure in it. But there was also more to it than just stenciling artwork. There was learning and understanding layout. I had this epiphany because I thought of myself as an artist as growing up. I didn't stop thinking of myself as an artist until I became a writer. But I studied art extensively. And at one point, I got heavily into the work of Mondrian. And I realized that Mondrian's work in the 20s had effectively revolutionized commercial magazine design worldwide. The way he organized space on a page
The
with
grid.
metric designs was exactly the way in which all modern art layout is done in magazines, whereas before that, you go back to the Victorian look, it's fussy, it's overly ornate, and there's not much sense of layout or design. It's just fill in all the blank spaces with something. And learning that about Mondrian, learning about the Bauhaus school in Germany, which was heavily into typography and layout as well as art. All of these things were great revolutions and revelations to me, that, and I, of course, sitting there in my basement, I was applying all of that to the FANAC I was doing, much in the same way you guys were applying your art to what you were doing as fans. And I think it's sort of associated, but not the same.
All right. Thank you,
you.
Ted. Geri, Suzel, would you please go off mute and let me get you up on screen. All right, I'm getting there.
Maybe not.
There we go.
There we go.
Ah,
Geri and Suzel.
hi guys.
Are they muted?
No,
Either
they-
mute or delay.
Or pantomime artist.
Yeah, Jerry, I can't hear you. All right. How many words? Sounds like.
Technical problems.
Bill-
You're not
No,
hearing
it's
you.
mic's on. See, we're showing a yellow.
There we
sign.
go.
Can you hear us
Okay,
now?
there you are.
Okay, good. I don't,
I don't know what happened.
the microphone was off, but after that, who knows? Okay, I was saying that Grant mentioned early on about contributing artwork to Hank Luttrell's fanzine, and I just wanted to mention that Starling was also Leslie Luttrell's fanzine.
Oh, of course.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, she kind of mentions that in the chat without saying the name of the zine, so I'm not sure if people thought there were two different zines involved. And she mentioned that she and Hank published artwork by all four of you.
Right.
Okay, so the piece, I really like this piece quite a lot. And let's see if
Oh, that's Dan. That's by Dan.
Going closer, 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 but up a little.
There we go.
Stop.
There we go. I think this is a wonderful set of caricatures of three of our major science fiction writers. I think this must have been for a Trapdoor article.
I think it was actually an idea.
Oh, okay. Geri Sullivan, was this an idea?
I am uncertain. I would have to go look.
Okay.
Well,
Anyway, I just thought it was really
It's
funny.
feeling familiar, but not hugely
Yeah.
familiar.
The caricatures and the three word balloons reading them from left to right, I thought were quite funny. So that's it.
Well, caricature is one of the hardest kinds of cartooning. And I occasionally can do it well and manage to do three of them on that one that actually look like the guys. I'm astonished by that to this day by that drawing. But thanks for showing that, because I consider them some of the hardest things to do, just not just fan art, but art period, is to draw a caricature or a portrait of somebody and really hit that one thing that makes it look like them.
It's
Thanks.
fun though.
Oops.
Speaking of which,
Oh,
this was Dan's Jesus Christ Neo fan, that has some good character to,
Mhm.
and just oops, oh, I just went to the okay, sorry. This was in Science Fiction 5 yearly number 9 that Jeff Shull and I published along with Andy Hooper, I believe.
That was a comic strip about Jesus' second coming, but he makes the mistake of showing up at a convention.
Yeah.
where they welcome him open-handed and admire the makeup skills that give him his stigmata, and when he says peace to you all, they say, to give the live long and prosper. And
Yeah,
in
the
the end-
Bible's okay, I guess, but I prefer Tolkien and hey geez, we're out of wine again. And I love the very last one with the Beam Me Up Scotty and the Arthur Thompson little character in there.
Yeah, Jesus
Yeah.
didn't convert anybody that day, but they converted him.
Okay. I asked Edie if I could do a plug here. I am in the process of putting idea number 13 together, a mere 23 years after idea 12 came out. Dan Steffan is the most recent contributor, sending art for a piece of fan fiction that Ted White wrote. We've also got material from Lenny Bales, and Sandra Bond is working on Taft Trip Report stuff. And for everybody on, both our art participants, of course, but for everybody on this video, there will be hard copies that I mail out to people, and I'm putting a thing in the chat. If I can hit the return key here. PDFs will be available online at fanact.org and at fanzines.com. But if you would like an actual printed copy, and yeah, it's not going to be on fiber tone put through my color laser printer, which I have done to great delight in the past. I am going the Kindle Direct Publishing because, as fans always have gone for the cheapest way of reproduction, it is by far the cheapest way of reproduction. Yeah, Edie, you passed on enough reams, and Ted gave me copies of Twill Tone and another paper, a very yellow paper, and I'm trying to remember the name. It was a different brand I hadn't known before, but it cost me too much to do it through color laser printers and color inkjets. But I am hoping, I'm working to have it coming out in November. And if you would like a copy, please send email to idea@toad-hall.com with your mailing address. And even if you were on the old Idea mailing list, I started updating the mailing list, and the few that I knew, oh yeah, that's still their address, you're still on the list, but I've got over 100 addresses to confirm because they're from 23 years ago, and I don't know folks are all there. And I've met other people like Leslie Luttrell since then, and I am happy. I'm happy to send it to anybody in this Zoom that was in this group. And if people see the Zoom online and want to ask me for it, I'll be looking for letters of comment and stuff. I'm hoping that I don't just publish Idea 13, but it's pretty exciting and fun to be doing. And I'd like to thank FANAC and especially, it's like I've known Dan forever and adore him, and I'm thrilled to be publishing his art.
What's not to adore?
What's not to adore? Like I said, hey, total adoration.
But Geri, if I may interrupt you, I think it says a lot about you that I drew that drawing. And it's the first drawing I've finished in more than 2 years. So you got you're the one with the luck, and I appreciate you rubbing it off on me so I could finish the drawing.
Yeah, I'm thrilled, and I got to know.
I'm going to interrupt you too once. Yeah,
sorry,
I'm going to interrupt you once more. If you really want to get properly fanish, and this is away from the rest of this Zoom,
properly fanish.
I have a hand crank mimeograph that I can bring up to you that was used by Lee Hoffman and Robert Silverberg. And you can do it properly.
And also appeared.
I would like to interrupt you to point out that I still have around 10 cases of Twill Tone in my
and Topsham.
Three Gestetners, none of which have been used in the last, more than 20 years now, I guess. And if anyone wants to make use of these things, get in touch with me. We can do something.
Oh, we have to give credit to a call out to Jeff Shawless, who gave his dozen-plus mimeos to this artist collective down in Iowa. I think it's Iowa City, somewhere in Iowa. They're very happy to have it.
And he's happy to have them out of his house.
Yep. He kept collecting after we broke up.
Okay.
So while we're pitching fanzines, Susan and I are planning another issue of Little Brook to be ready for Corflu, which will be in Las Vegas this coming year. And I hope to see some of you there. But we could use a cover, maybe some Spottillos. We have contributions from Eli Cohen, who, if you remember from a couple of years ago, won the coveted Best New Fan Award, and Cy Chauvin.
Sorry to have hijacked the talk.
I'd like to point out this is
like the
not
fan-
performance art. This is spontaneous combustion.
Okay, we should get back to our artist.
So if do we have any other questions or comments from folks that are out there in Zoom land? No? So thank you guys. If anyone's got final comments, we'd love to have them.
Well,
And-
I would just like to say that it's
No.
sort of sad to realize, looking at all the pictures of all of us here, how old we all are. Of course, as has already been remarked, so many of us aren't with us anymore. You know, Steve Stiles, Bill Rotsler, people like that. I mean, we miss them. You know, we really do. And it's sad to realize that we are sort of the last of what we have done. That there aren't a lot of newcomers following along in our footsteps anymore.
That was a golden age.
Yeah, but Ted, I'd point out that we're going to be immortalized in ones and zeros. So anyone that's interested will be able to check it
Yeah.
out and go look online and at least immerse themselves, should they choose to, in any of our history that interests them.
So you're
I
saying
just-
there,
I-
you're beaming our ones and zeros out into space, and someone on a star field far, far away is going to look at the data stream and go, "What the hell am I looking at?"
That's
I
true.
just would like to say thank you to everybody. It's been a real joy sharing this time with you and talking about the good old days. And I'm sure there's lots we missed. But thanks, everybody. And thanks, Edie and Joe, for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks,
I
everybody.
second all that.
Yes, thanks all of you. And we should be glad that at least those of us who are still around are still around.
That's true.
There you go.